the Texans select tight end Hunter Henry. And at long last, my and possibly your Minnesota Vikings are on the clock. And make no mistake, the Minnesota Vikings are drafting a wide receiver. Unless Zimmer is in love with a specific defensive player at an area of need that could play, which would only be safety and outside linebacker. An outside linebacker would be the 4-3 outside linebacker, which we've got Greenway expecting to play there this year and some other young guys. So it's not a smart pick at all to go outside linebacker, not a smart pick to go defensive lineman. You can pick a safety, you can pick a wide receiver, or the only other option is if there is a legitimate potential heir at left tackle to Matt Khalil who could come in, be his backup for this year, and then you do not have to pick him up and re-sign him next year when his contract is up. You have leverage, you have flexibility, you've got depth, you've got youth, and so that is the only way. If Jack Conklin or Taylor Decker fall to 23, the Minnesota Vikings will run up and draft whichever one of those players is there. If both of those guys are gone, which believe you me, they will be long gone, the Vikings will not draft an offensive lineman. They've got 9 offensive linemen already, 4 new ones from last year. Okay, remember this, if you're thinking about the Vikings offensive line. The Vikings were the only team last year to start all 5 people in every game at the same position. Khalil, Fusco, Berger, Mike Harris, TJ Clemmings. All 5 of those are returning. Mike Harris was signed to a new contract to do that. Clemmings was drafted last year to build on that. Fusco's got a fairly big contract. Khalil picked up his final option. It's a big year for him. And Berger was an all-pro, elite, top 5, maybe even top 2 center in the league last year. So there's your 5. And then we add 4 new pieces to that we did not have last year. Obviously, the big Alex Boone signing going to start at left guard for us and lock things down, and we love that. The 1-year right tackle signing in Andre Smith. And then do not forget the returning from injury and re-signed to a 2-year deal Phil Lodeholt, and the returning from injury and perennial Pro Bowler John Sullivan. That's 9 freaking guys. You only field 8, maybe 9 offensive linemen on your 53-man regular season roster. So it makes no sense to take a Cody Whitehair at all. The Vikes will not do it. There's no spot on the team for him. When it comes to the offensive line, there's only one open spot on this team. At least in first round, by far, and that is backup left tackle, heir apparent to Khalil. The only other potential spot at any point in time on the offensive line would be a young backup center, just because of the age of Berger and Sullivan, as well as the recent injury history of Sullivan. But all that said, so we can pretty much eliminate that. There are no offensive linemen there that we're going to take, and it's very specific, the one that would need to be there that we would take. So, and the only defensive player that's going to be that has an opportunity to be on the field enough to justify a first round pick would have to play safety. And none of the safeties in this draft are consensusly believed to be good enough to take here. So you take the obvious, you take the wide receiver, and we will find out who the Vikings think is the best wide receiver in this draft. Doxson, or Treadwell, or someone else. Because they will take Doxson over Treadwell if they believe he's the better guy. They'll take Treadwell over Doxson at 23 because he's going to be available. Or they will trade down and take someone other than those 2 guys, hopefully Michael Thomas, who I believe is the best receiver in this draft and the best fit for the Minnesota Vikings. But to get the Vikings off the clock and make the official pick, the Minnesota Vikings stay at 23 and select wide receiver Laquan Treadwell to the resounding joys of Viking fans around the state of Minnesota. And with that, the Cincinnati Bengals are on the clock. The Cincinnati Bengals are without question looking primarily at wide receiver, and they've basically got their pick of who they like the most. Treadwell's the one guy that they're not looking at because they've got a Laquan Treadwell type of wide receiver in A.J. Green. Only Treadwell's more limited and not as good at it. They lost their 2 and 3 receivers in Sanu and Marvin Jones. So because of that, I think instead of going with a specialty receiver like a Corey Coleman, who's small, is going to run a lot of short slant routes, maybe in the slot, stuff like that, or a Will Fuller, who's strictly a speed guy with significant questions concerning his ability to catch the ball, sounds like Troy Williamson, if you ask me. The Bengals will take their most coveted player in the first round, their most coveted wide receiver. They're looking for the most complete, all-around A.J. Green-ish, wide receiver, but not Treadwell because he's not enough. He's not complete enough. He's a little like A.J. Green as far as he's, you want him to be a number 1 guy, but he's really more of a Plaxico Burress-ish, I think, at best, number 2 possession guy. Michael Crabtree is the guy that I've compared Laquan Treadwell to this whole time. I think that's his NFL equivalent. And so the Bengals simply take the best wide receiver on their board from a complete standpoint, and that's Josh Doctson. And a phenomenal pick for the Bengals, a weapon for Andy Dalton, a great compliment on the other side of the field from A.J. Green. They've got Tyler Eifert in the middle, and they'll look maybe for a slot guy somewhere in the mid-rounds, which is where you should be taking a specialty guy like that that's only going to see the field maybe a quarter to a third of your offensive plays anyway. You need a starting number 2 receiver, and that's exactly what Josh Doctson is. He's an ideal number 2 receiver. Corey Coleman is a complementary number 2, maybe slot number 3 receiver, and Will Fuller is a complementary number 2 receiver that has very specific skill sets and very specific concerns and weaknesses, so that's why they pass on those 2 guys and go with the all-around, Josh Doctson. But don't be surprised if it's Corey Coleman or Will Fuller either, if they value the speed of Fuller or the short field abilities and all-around game of Corey Coleman. So now at 25, the Pittsburgh Steelers are on the clock. Pittsburgh Steelers, without question, will go secondary or defensive line. I think with this draft and with their specific needs on defensive line, they are very content and able to get that need addressed in the second or third round of this draft. However, the defensive back issue is a whole nother question. They will be picking from the final pair of first round worthy, potentially, defensive backs, that being Artie Burns and Mackenzie Alexander. I like Burns just a little bit better. I also think he's just a little bit more consensusly rated above Alexander, although not on everything. But I think out of the U of Miami, that he's also just something about Artie Burns. He seems like he seems like a Steeler type of player, and the Steelers are renowned for not just drafting an area of need to help their team, but drafting a certain type of character and personality to represent their organization. And I don't know, something about Artie Burns screams really good fit for the Steelers. And with the defensive line depth going to still be there in the next round, and the defensive back depth not being there, they go Artie Burns. But don't be surprised if they also go Alexander, or if for some reason Jackson III falls, or maybe this T.J. Green safety out of Clemson, who apparently is going to maybe be converted to cornerback or can play both, and as a result is last minute rising up draft boards apparently. But I think that's smoke screen. He'll be maybe a second or third round guy. But yes, Pittsburgh Steelers 25 take Artie Burns. On the clock is the Seattle Seahawks at 26. The Seattle Seahawks are falling apart on the offensive line and losing a lot on their defense. They lost 2 Pro Bowlers in their linebacking core. They lost a Pro Bowler at defensive tackle. They lost depth in their secondary, and they have lost basically everyone on their offensive line. I think they have the type of coaching, the type of scheme, and the type of depth from previous drafts to handle their defensive needs and upgrades in the later rounds of this draft. I don't feel that there are many offensive linemen that they can get later on in the draft that are, day one starters at any position. And that's what I feel they need the most, without question. They got to protect Russell Wilson, and they got to run the ball, or they can't win games. It doesn't matter what their defense is doing. So that being said, they take the best offensive lineman available with the most position flexibility, because they have openings almost everywhere on the offensive line, and that is Cody Whitehair. He played tackle for Kansas State, believed to be a guard on the NFL level. I would compare him to a poor man's Zach Martin. He's nowhere as good as the Dallas Cowboys' Zach Martin. Doesn't have the size or anything like that. But a poor man's version, where he can play and be efficient and productive at basically every spot on your offensive line. Ideally, the Seattle Seahawks take him, and they know that they've got a day one starter at either right tackle or right guard in him, and that's one major need that they can cross off the list. Center Ryan Kelly would be another possibility there, as he is the best lineman available, period, if you're looking at all offensive linemen. And they traded away their Pro Bowl offensive lineman Max Unger to the Saints last year to get Jimmy Graham. So he would make sense there as well, but I think they got to go with the position flexibility, and that's why Cody Whitehair wins out. That puts the Green Bay Packers on the clock at number 27. The Packers are very unhappy with how this draft has played out, because they desperately want a defensive lineman for their 3-4 scheme. However, no one still available is worthy of a first-round pick. Good news for them, there will definitely be someone that will fit their scheme and have a lot of talent that they can take in the second round. So they're looking for a playmaker in their secondary or a playmaker in their linebacking core. It just so happens that there aren't really any left, with the exception of maybe Mackenzie Alexander or TJ Green in the secondary. They're not willing to take a risk on either one of those. They've got an aging linebacker in Clay Matthews. They run a 3-4. He's the only playmaker they've got, and so they take what is, in my opinion, a reach, and what in some people's opinion will be a value pick, because I've seen this guy going, as high as like 12. Anywhere outside of the top 10, I've seen this guy going as high as. But I think personally he'll probably fall out of the first round. But the way this draft is played out with me GMing, you've got to take the best player available, the only player available left, I should say, at a position of need, and that is outside linebacker Noah Spence. Similar to Leonard Floyd, athletic freak, not a lot of production on tape necessarily to go by. You're drafting on potential and on team need, but you've got a very high ceiling with this guy. Very, very high ceiling. Like I said, they'd love to go with a more surefire defensive lineman, but the ones they had their hearts set on are gone, and all the ones that are left, like I said, they'll get in rounds 2 or 3. No big deal. The only other route then would be if they feel their secondary, losing Truman Williams, is a big enough area of need. They still have Sam Shields, arguably the best defensive back in the division. So the only reason I don't have them going Mackenzie Alexander there is I don't know how big of an area of concern or need they think and realize their secondary is. I know they realize that they need more playmakers in their linebacking core. So that's why I have them going Noah Spence there. And we're almost done. We've got 4 picks left, and then Balls Deep Thought of the Day, and we're out of here. Holy guacamole, it's late. So super speeding this along. The Kansas City Chiefs are on the clock at 28. Could definitely go defensive line, inside linebacker, or secondary. I think they will go wide receiver personally, because there's depth in the other rounds at those other positions. There is not at wide receiver, and they've basically got their pick here, and they're looking for a complement to their, to Jeremy Maclin, the number one they've got right now, and I think that is speed, glorious speed, and so I am taking Will Fuller, wide receiver, Notre